Hello everyone, welcome again to the channel. Today I want to share with you my opinion about some topics related to the current conflict in Ukraine, and let's start with this article that says Ukraine fears it might lose Western support over war fatigue. As the war in Ukraine drags on, Ukrainian officials fear that Kiev might lose some Western support due to war fatigue. The US and its allies had committed billions of dollars in weapons, but some Western European leaders have been calling for a negotiated solution to end the fighting, an idea Ukrainian officials have rejected. So I wanted to highlight something I found in another article that is for a completely different subject, and I already covered the topic of this article in a previous video, but I wanted to highlight this part that is related to this so-called war fatigue. And this comes from Ukrainian ambassador to Israel, and he says Kornichuk spoke of his frustration over Israel's failure to provide Ukraine with defensive military assistance, technical military support, and continued medical support, including its refusal to treat Ukrainian soldiers in its hospitals. And then it says Israel is no longer focused on the war. Kornichuk charged Ukraine has been removed from the Israeli press almost completely. He says, so there is no war anymore. The absence of war news is reflective of the government's unease with the war, he said, such that it is more comfortable placing the war on the back burner. So what is important about this is somehow this goal to have Ukraine in the front line, to have Ukraine in the first page, because they fear that the world will forget about this particular topic, and especially the leaders of the country and people who can influence somehow decisions making. So this is very interesting. I don't think it's something positive to keep trying to push the issue, but this is exactly the topic that they are trying to talk about here. And let's continue with the topic and what else they say. The current situation on the battlefield is not looking good for Ukraine. An advisor to Zelensky said Thursday that they are losing between 100 and 200 troops each day, and this is a higher number than they have been reporting recently. So this is still very low in my opinion, and especially because we have seen how the performance of the Ukrainian army have been degraded in the front lines. So I will be thinking that it is much higher than this, but of course I don't have the specific numbers to support this. Let's continue. Zelensky has made clear that his goal is to drive Russia out of the territory it has captured since February 24, which will require a massive military offensive. Again, I mentioned this particular topic previously. This is a goal that is completely unrealistic. Ukrainian army has seen its backbone broken ever since the operation started. Basically, in the first few days of the Russian military operation, the main lines of defense and the main equipment that the Ukraine had, it was almost entirely destroyed, and that was at the start of the military conflict, so it hasn't recovered, and this is definitively something that they are not considering in their assessment of how things are in this particular topic. And they continue to say that they want to drive Russia out of the territory, even the territory that it was captured before, so including Crimea. And of course, in this part it says that it will require a massive military offensive, and this massive military offensive is beyond the capabilities that Ukraine has at the moment. So it's absolutely impossible to do this, especially since the equipment that has been supplied to Ukraine has not come in the numbers that even the numbers that Ukraine had before this started, As we will see in some other articles that I will mention, this is definitively something that is not happening, and is the training, which is the human part, is what makes it impossible. Is not that it won't be absolutely impossible, as if it was a time frame different, but the current time frame is just impossible. Like I mentioned before, training a capable soldier takes years, and Ukraine has lost many troops. So even if they supply new equipment, training soldiers to operate this equipment takes a long time, sometimes months, even years, to be able to operate equipment effectively. So this is not going to happen. Even in the short term, the Donbass region is going to completely fall, and the army there is going to be completely defeated. This is not only my opinion, but is the assessment that some military experts have been calling to the attention of the media recently. So this is just prolonging the inevitable, and for no good reason, just killing more Ukrainian soldiers, more civilians, is not going to help Ukraine. Like the nation of Ukraine is not going to help it. He continues, while there is some sentiment among European leaders for Ukraine to make concessions to Russia to achieve peace, top US and NATO officials are encouraging Ukraine to keep fighting. So this is very negative, in my opinion, especially NATO in particular, and Ukraine, US. They are been calling for this totally unrealistic goal, and of course this, they use it as an excuse to call for more weapons, and the only ones who profit from this are the weapon manufacturers, like I said in another video as well. So this is not helping Ukraine, and they know it. They are not ignorant of the situation, the military situation. They know how it's going. They know it's impossible to win. They know it's impossible to mount a sufficiently strong counterattack. So this is only going to hurt the people that are living in Ukraine. Let's pay attention to some of the other articles that I was going to mention. So for example, this one comes from Spain, and it says Spain to ship 40 second-hand Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Spain plans to send 40 Leopard A4 tanks to Ukraine, bought from Germany in 1995. So they are at least 27 years old, these tanks. The tanks are among 108 second-hand Leopard tanks hibernating at an army logistic base in Zaragoza for a decade. So they haven't even been used for a decade, and I think I read somewhere else that to be able to use them, Ukraine needs to repair them, so they cannot just start using it immediately, so it will take some time to repair the tanks. And then they are also mentioning here the fact that they need to be trained, and the Spanish government has offered to train the soldiers in Latvia, and they should be training in a second phase in Spain, in Spanish territory. And what is not visible here is the fact that 40 tanks are not going to change the course of the war. At the start of the war, Ukraine had many tanks, probably hundreds, if not more. So sending 40 is not going to do anything. It's just the fact that this is not going to help in any way, in any significant way. Additionally, the Spanish government is finalizing the delivery of a battery of short-at-speed anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine, which has been replaced by a more advanced model. So this is again the same thing that we were mentioning, which is the fact that it is not possible for Ukraine to receive enough equipment to make a change in the course of the war. So this is just it's hopeless. It's a hopeless situation, but many people in the West are not aware of this, and they think that all these weapon deliveries are somehow going to change the course of the war, and it doesn't change anything. But weapons are expensive. Before this, Ukraine has been armed itself for 8 years, and it has been prepared itself for 8 years, training its soldiers, training its military, acquiring equipment. So it took 8 years for Ukraine to reach the point where it was before the military operation, and then most of the military equipment that Ukraine had, it was destroyed. And the fact is that it's not going to change much sending the numbers that they're sending. So let's pay attention to this particular information. For example, this comes from the Ministry of Defense from the Russian Federation, and this is the equipment losses of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is by June 10, 2022. Ukraine has lost 195 airplanes, 130 helicopters, 1,168 drones, 336 anti-aircraft missile systems. So this is the numbers that you should be paying attention when you see that they're going to send some anti-aircraft systems to Ukraine, and they're going to send small numbers, so it's not going to change anything. This is the number that I was referring to. See how many tanks Ukraine had. 3,483 tanks, and they were destroyed. This includes not only tanks, but also armored vehicles of other kinds, and they were destroyed, and they are going to send 40. So how 40 is going to change anything at all? Take a look at the multiple rocket launchers. About 500 multiple rocket launchers Ukraine had, and now the UK and the US are going to send 7 between the two of them. So how 7 is going to change anything? It's not. Field artillery and mortars, 1,843 were destroyed. So this is artillery. So this includes howitzers and just cannons and all kinds of long-range artillery and mortars. So it's a big number. And some other vehicles, including troop movement vehicles, 3,528 were also destroyed. So this is, like I said, hopeless. send 40 tanks that are not even battle ready. The Ukrainian military needs to be trained for months before they are even able to operate these tanks. So the Battle of the Donbass will end very soon, so this will not be ready for this, and it's just nonsensical from the numbers point of view. Like I said in a previous article, mathematics is never going to lie. So you just need to see the numbers to see the reality. Get away from politics, get away from opinions, get away from all this, and just see the numbers for yourself and form your own opinion. This is another article about weapons, and this comes from Poland, and it says Poland to deliver self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine. So howitzers fall into the category of field artillery and mortars. So Poland is going to deliver 50, or they say more than 50, I don't know how many, they don't specify. So Poland has signed 700 million contract with Ukraine to sell the country more than 50 155 millimeters Crab self-propelled howitzers. The deal comes a month after Poland delivered 18 Crab guns to Ukraine from its reserves. So they deliver 18. That's what they're saying here. So again, just compare 18 against 1,800. So look at the numbers and see for yourself if you think this is going to change anything at all. And even what follows here is even more coming into this topic. I said before that the deliveries are going to be very slow, so they're not even going to deliver 50 at once. The deliveries are expected to begin this year and be complete in 2023. So then that's next year. 1 full year or 2 years, because let's pay more attention here. They say the NATO compatible guns will reportedly be manufactured in Polish armaments group Huta Stalowa Wola plant, which can currently produce 20 to 30 units per year. 20 to 30 units per year. And they have other orders. So maybe not only the orders of Ukraine, maybe someone else also ordered these howitzers. So it will take probably 3 years to deliver them all. Just consider that, 20 each year, 30 maximum. If all of the capacity, manufacturing capacity, was focused only on producing the units for Ukraine, they will deliver them still in 2 full years. 2 full years. What do you think it will happen in 2 full years if hasn't been much more than 100 days of the battle and Ukraine's army is almost completely defeated? So this is really completely unrealistic, and just look at the numbers. That's all you need to do to form your own opinion. Pay attention to this, which is historical context for this. Poland ordered a total of 120 Crabs in 2016 for its army, and the complete batch is expected to be delivered by 2024. So from 2016 to 2024, that is 8 years. So it took 8 years, or it will take 8 years to deliver 120 of them. And even 120 is a small number. Of course, it's bigger than 20, but it is still very small, and those are the numbers that currently Poland has. So even Poland had much less howitzers than Ukraine had at the start of the military conflict. And then they provide here some other information that is really not so relevant, but they say the gun can fire 6 rounds per minute up to 30 kilometers, and rocket-assisted projectiles can be launched up to 40 kilometers. They talk something about how the purchase is going to be funded by Ukraine and by some funds from the European Union. Here you have some photos of the howitzers, maybe very powerful howitzers, but in small numbers they won't change anything. Just it's not going to change anything. It doesn't matter if they fire 6 rounds per minute. Another issue that is at stake here is the fact that they have different calibers, so ammunition is also important. They are not just compatible with what Ukraine currently has, so they're going to use different caliber. So also the ammunition is a big bottleneck for Ukraine. And just imagine, if this thing fires 6 rounds per minute, how many do you need to have the unit fighting constantly for 24 hours? Just imagine. And it is not only one, but it's 20, 30, 50. Imagine that all 50 reach at once. Just in 1 minute they will be firing 50 times 6, 300 munitions in a minute. 300 munitions in a minute. So just imagine 1 hour. In 1 hour they will be firing something like 1,800 munitions in 1 hour. And they are delivering some ridiculous numbers of munitions, something like 15,000 munitions of 155 millimeters. So that is not even going to last for 1 day. Not even for 1 day. So it's completely unrealistic. Look at the numbers, people. I urge you to pay attention to the numbers. And this is another article that I wanted to mention about a slightly different topic, but it's again about the Ukrainian army. They say this comes from Alexei Arestovich, which is a Ukrainian official. He says more than 10,000 Ukrainian fighters have been killed since Russian President Vladimir Putin launched his invasion. And they're not saying how many exactly, just say more than 10,000. And they're using their own numbers for this, which they say that the average has been 100 soldiers a day. That is very much like a low bowling number. They are really making low estimates on purpose. Just recently there was some military expert from the US who says that Ukraine at the start of the war had an army of 200,000 soldiers, and they fear that the army disappeared. They don't know what happened to the army, and it was 200,000 soldiers. So what happened to the 200,000 soldiers? Now they are just acknowledging 10,000 of them. So this is deceivingly in purpose. On purpose they're trying to deceive people for no good reason, really. And just pay attention to this part that is even more ridiculous. They say Kiev claims Russia has lost 3 times as many troops. And although British intelligence puts the figure at 15,000, but let's look at the reality. Who is winning the war and who is losing the war. So how come, if you use certain logic, Ukraine has lost 3 times less than Russia has? It just it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense, and you just need to use a little bit of logic. If Ukraine was winning the war, maybe, but it's not. So this is again some very unrealistic numbers and very unuseful for this. They say, meanwhile, Ukraine pledged to help as much as possible with efforts to release 2 British men who fought with its armed forces and were last week sentenced to death by a Russian proxy court. So this story is also another story that is portrayed in the Western media in the wrong way. But let's read this part first and then I will give you my opinion. They say British Army veteran John Pinner, 48, and former care worker Aid Aslin, 28, faced death by firing squad in rebel-held Donetsk. Third capture Britain Andrew Hill is awaiting trial. Mr. Pinner's family said yesterday they were devastated at the outcome of the illegal show trial, adding that he should be treated as a prisoner of war under the Geneva Convention. So a lot of people don't know how the Geneva Convention works, but they are using this in the wrong context. So Geneva Convention protects soldiers from nations at war. And these guys are Ukrainian citizens? No. They were born in England. So England or the United Kingdom is not at war with Russia. So they are not protected by the Geneva Convention, and that's why they are considered to be mercenaries. Because they are fighting for money. And they say that they started fighting there or living there in 2018. They say here Russia claims the pair are mercenaries despite the fact that both have lived in Ukraine since 2018 and have Ukrainian partners. They served with Ukraine's 36th Marine Brigade and were taken prisoners in Mariupol in April. This doesn't change anything because they arrived to Ukraine to fight. They arrived to Ukraine to fight, so they were hired as foreigners. If they later acquire a different status, that doesn't change the fact that they are foreigners fighting a war that is not their own. So they started fighting as mercenaries in 2018. Even if they have Ukrainian partners, that doesn't change anything. So this is just useless information and is not relevant at all. So it's just more just propaganda, trying to give a different image and try to somehow justify the actions of this guy and try to exculpate them, trying to say that they are innocent and saying that the trial is illegal. Why is it illegal? Really, why? The authorities of this province of Donetsk have their own authorities. They are not recognized by the UK, but it doesn't matter. They don't need to be recognized by the UK because Ukraine is at war with Russia, not the UK. So it doesn't make sense. It's completely out of context. So they say here, presidential advisor Alexander Rodnyansky said there will be an extremely high price. They're talking about a prisoner exchange, which will mean we will have to exchange a lot of prisoners, Russian prisoners, in return for these men. And this is, again, very callous language, saying that they have a price for people. And it seems from this kind of statement that they are unwilling to do it. Because why save two British citizens when they can just save regular Ukrainian soldiers? So this is not going to happen. I even doubt they will even propose such a solution. I doubt that the Donetsk People's Republic will be interested in such an exchange. But I could be wrong, so we don't know. And they, at the end, just pepper the article with this nonsense statement at the end. Both countries' supplies of shells are reportedly being sapped by the war of artillery in the region. That is not true. Ukraine, maybe, as we discussed, they don't have enough shells, munitions for howitzers, for other artillery pieces. But Russia has plenty of them, and there's a lot of videos about how supplies arrive by train. there's a sufficient supply of shells. They are not stopping anytime soon, so just adding this useless information at the end of the article is just more propaganda. In the same context, let's pay attention to something that I already mentioned before in previous videos about the fact that Russia is destroying Western weapons. So it is already shown in the article which I already showed you before. Some of these weapons are already destroyed and they were accounted for, but a lot of these weapon deliveries are destroyed even before they become operational, like I said also in a previous video. This one in particular says Russian forces fire caliber cruise missiles to destroy a large depot with US and European weapons in Ukraine's Chernobyl region. And Russian forces have also recently shot down 3 Ukrainian Su-25 fighter jets near Donetsk and Kharkiv. So adding to the numbers to equipment that has been destroyed already, and they're just sending some more. It doesn't change anything. Recently also Slovakia sent S-300 anti-aircraft system, and it was deployed near Dnipropetrovsk. It was destroyed immediately before it was even operational. So it's useless. Ukraine is not winning. Ukraine is not having any benefit from these systems. The only people who is benefiting from this is the weapon manufacturers, like I mentioned many times before. They are making huge profits, so why would they want to stop the war in Ukraine? Yeah, let it continue. It doesn't matter if Ukrainian soldiers die, if Russian soldiers die, civilians die. They don't care. They just are making a huge profit, so why stop the war? This is another topic that is also related to Ukraine and is very shameless in my opinion. They say Ukraine grain exports via Poland, Romania face bottlenecks. So this has been already mentioned several times, which they have the option to export the grain through Poland and Romania, but they're mentioning here some logistical issues, like they say food global security was at risk because Russia's invasion of Ukraine had halted Kiev's Black Sea grain export, as if it was only the decision of Russia to do this. Ukraine is the world's 4th largest grain export, and it says there are 30 million tons in grain stored in Ukrainian held territory, which is trying to export via road, river, and rail. Ukraine was in talks with Baltic states toward the 3rd corridor for food exports, and we will talk about that with the Baltic states, which is also completely contrary to what is really happening. So they are being very hypocritical about this. They are trying to say they are trying to have some kind of talks with Baltic states, but the reality is they are not doing anything. And they are talking here about some logistical issues because Poland has a different size of the railroad, so the railroad from Ukraine cannot go straight into Poland. And going to Romania, they're using transport by rail to ports, and then they are loading cargo into barges, and that's what is happening. And then here is the fact at the end. They say Russia is also a major exporter of grain, so just blaming the situation in Ukraine for the situation doesn't take into consideration the Western sanctions. They have been sanctioning Russia, so that made it more difficult for Russia to export its grain. Even if the Ukrainian grain cannot be exported, also Russia will help. If they are kind of concerned about global food security, why not lift the sanctions so the grain can be exported? They are not doing it. And they're talking here in the last part about this. They say the war in Ukraine dominated proceedings at the Singapore meeting, the Shangri-La dialogue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told them that their nation's support was crucial, not just to defeat the Russian invasion, but to preserve the rules-based order. So he's just talking in the same language that the US was talking. They even told him what words to use. They want to defeat Russia. Like I said before when we started the video, they cannot defeat Russia. They won't defeat Russia. They cannot even defend their own territories. And this is the situation. It's just unrealistic. Just look at the numbers. I repeat again. This is related to a recent news from a Lithuanian president who says he strongly opposes transport of Ukrainian grain through Belarus. So how worried is he about grain security, global food security? This is a Lithuanian president, Gitanas Nausėda, and he says that the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko made it clear that he supports Russian military aggression against Ukraine, which means that the transportation of goods through this country is out of the question. So this will be so easy because the size of the railroad of Ukraine and Belarus is compatible, so it will be faster to ship the grain. It could be done very quickly to ship the grain through Belarus, but they are not doing it. They say my opinion and assessment are still the same. We need to look for other alternative solutions. The Lithuanian president also mentioned that he doesn't see the possibility of resuming the transit of Belarusian fertilizers through Lithuania as well, a condition set by Lukashenko for the proposed grain transport scheme. And they're complaining, there is not enough fertilizers, people is going to starve to death. But we won't lift the sanctions on Belarus. The European Union was very clear in its decision to impose sanctions on fertilizers, and Lithuania has followed that decision. Should we now just close our eyes and say that Lukashenko suddenly became a much more acceptable leader or did something good, so we should lift these sanctions? So it's a political decision. It's not as they claim to be. It's not like it's impossible. They just don't want to do it, so they are the ones who are starving people. Their political decisions are the ones that are creating the food crisis. So it's a compound issue. It's not as one-dimensional as they want to make it to be. And lastly, they say President Volodymyr Zelensky has also come out against the proposed idea. So see how is the contradiction? They're saying here that they were trying to work with the Baltics. Yes, I think here I forget what it was. Yes, so in the previous article that we were mentioning, they say that they were working with the Baltics to have some kind of negotiation for the grain to be shipped. Here you see, this part here says Ukraine was in talks with Baltic states to add a third corridor for food exports. So this is contradictory because he says they are talking, but here says Volodymyr Zelensky was against the idea. So how are they going to ship the grain through the Baltics? It's not possible. Earlier this month, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin said that Ukraine can export grain through Belarus, but in order for this to happen, the sanctions against Belarus and its leader must be lifted first. It's logical. If you have the sanctions, you cannot export. So they're shooting themselves in the foot, and then they're claiming that it's all Russia's fault. And not only Russia's fault, but also Belarusians' fault, Ukrainian ports of grain are currently blocked or occupied by the Russian armed forces and navy, and no mention about Ukrainian mines, which makes it impossible to ship any ship in the ports to go through it because they will be destroyed. There have been some reports of civilian ships already being damaged by mines. So it's not only the Russian blockade, it's also the mines. Belarus has been used as a staging ground in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as well as serving as a safe location for Russian missile launchers. So that is the excuse for the sanctions on Belarus. I'm not saying it's an invalid reason, but I say that they are making these contradictory statements that are just completely deceiving people. They are saying that it is all Russia's fault and we're not doing anything to create a crisis. So it is what it is. That's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section of the video. And as always, I ask you to please like the video, share it in social media, and subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you for watching.